Elliot Crane leaned back in his leather office chair, a smirk stretching across his face as he gazed at his cityscape view. He was feeling especially proud today. Elliot, the founder of an ever-expanding fitness empire called Titan Wellness, had just secured a win that tasted sweeter than any before. His gaze flicked to his phone, where a new email pinged, confirming what he already knew. A local fitness facility, FitCore, was on the verge of collapse, and he was the reason. 2 months ago, Elliot had strolled into FitCore under the guise of a friendly mentor, offering business tips to the owner, Jeff Adams. Jeff had been running his small, community-focused gym for over a decade, known for its warm atmosphere and loyal members. But loyalty, Elliot knew, was a fragile thing, easily bent and broken with the right amount of pressure. He'd made it a sport to see just how far he could push. At first, he'd been charming, striking up friendly conversations with Jeff, learning everything he could about the facility's strengths and weaknesses. Elliot had even done a few workouts there, drawing curious eyes as he greeted Jeff with familiarity. Slowly, he started planting seeds of doubt among the members. Subtle, seemingly offhand remarks about Jeff's lack of ambition and poor business practices. "It's a shame, really," Elliot would say in the locker room, casual as anything. FitCore could be great if Jeff didn't have his head stuck in the past. Soon, whispers turned to full-blown rumours. Members began questioning Jeff's decisions, and dissatisfaction grew. Elliot watched with satisfaction as, one by one, members defected to his Titan Wellness clubs, lured by flashy facilities, advanced equipment, and a persuasive new member discount. Now Jeff was drowning in debt, his business faltering. The irony wasn't lost on Elliot as he leaned back, recalling his last encounter with Jeff just a few days ago. Jeff had pleaded with him, desperation etched across his face. "Elliot, I thought you were here to help," he'd said, nearly choking on the words. "Jeff, all's fair in business, right?" Elliot had replied, feigning sympathy. "This is the new way to recruit customers. You can't be soft anymore, or you'll get eaten alive." Sitting in his office now, he chuckled to himself, feeling no remorse. In his mind, this was how business was done. He thrived on being ruthless. It was his edge, the very reason he was successful. His empire wasn't built on trust or friendship. Those were tools to be used, not qualities to be honoured. As he stood, he caught his reflection in the glass, a man in his mid-40s, immaculately dressed, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked every part the self-made mogul, and he was proud of it. He'd carved his own path, and if people got crushed along the way, that was simply the cost of success. Later that night, he attended a charity gala downtown, where he planned to network and flaunt his recent victories. Mingling with powerful investors and celebrities, he was in his element, until, across the room, he spotted her, a woman who seemed to radiate elegance and allure. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and carried an air of sophistication that was impossible to ignore. Intrigued, he made his way over, flashing his signature charming smile. She introduced herself as Lila Valen, a venture capitalist with a knack for spotting people with ambition. Her words had a dangerous edge to them, but Elliot found himself captivated, eager to impress. They clinked glasses, exchanged compliments, and, in hushed tones, shared secrets of their most ruthless business tactics. When he explained what he'd done to FitCore, she laughed, a low, sultry sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "You really are relentless," she purred. "I admire that." Elliot felt a thrill of validation he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know it yet, but Lila would soon offer him an opportunity he couldn't resist, and for the first time he'd find himself outmatched by someone even more ruthless than himself. Elliot strode through the bustling floors of Titan Fitness with a sense of satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. The facility was packed, every treadmill and weight bench occupied by eager members, many of whom he recognized from the small, independent gyms he'd methodically siphoned clients from. Titan Fitness gleamed with state-of-the-art machines, neon-lit workout studios, and polished granite counters at the juice bar, a stark contrast to the modest charm of the places he'd driven to the brink of collapse. As he walked past rows of dedicated gym-goers, exchanging nods with his trainers and basking in the energy of his empire, his eyes caught something, or rather, someone, that made him pause. Sitting gracefully on one of the machines was Lila, dressed in sleek workout attire that somehow looked both casual and luxurious. Lila commanded the entire room's attention. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and with each controlled movement, her lithe form seemed to exude a quiet, magnetic allure. Elliot noticed how people stopped mid-rep, eyes drawn to her, as though she were cast in an invisible net that pulled them in. Men and women alike couldn't resist stealing glances, their gazes lingering with an unspoken yearning. Even the music and clatter of weights seemed to fade in her presence. Elliot couldn't help but smile. Of course, she would be here. They'd crossed paths just last night, and though she'd left him with nothing more than a vague promise of future opportunities, he felt certain this was a sign. Gathering his confidence, he approached her, adjusting his tone to one of casual charm. "Lila," he said, offering a warm smile. "Didn't expect to see you here. Finding inspiration, are we?" She turned her head slowly, her piercing gaze meeting his. For a brief, tantalizing moment, a faint smile touched her lips, but she said nothing. It was as if she looked right through him, her eyes unfathomably deep, as though hiding secrets he couldn't begin to understand. Then, with the same silent grace, she rose from the machine, grabbed her water bottle, and walked past him, leaving behind only a faint scent of something intoxicatingly sweet, something that made Elliot's heart beat a little faster. For a moment, Elliot was frozen, taken aback by the unexpected dismissal. He was used to attention, especially in his own domain, yet here she was, as mysterious and aloof as ever, slipping away without a single word. Elliot's jaw tightened. This was his game, after all, and he was a master at it. He never let an opportunity slip, and Lila was an opportunity he intended to seize. If she thought she could leave him wanting, she was mistaken. He would play every card he had to win her favour. No one ignored Elliot Crane, least of all in his own facility. As she approached the exit, every eye in the gym turned, captivated. Some held their breath, as though hoping she'd glance back, that they might catch her attention for even a fleeting second. And then, just as she reached the doors, Lila paused. She turned, her gaze sweeping over the room with an ethereal quality that left everyone spellbound, like they were caught in a trance. For an instant, her eyes met Elliot's again. He felt a chill, a strange thrill he couldn't place, something far deeper than mere attraction. She turned away, her form slipping through the doors like a shadow, leaving the entire facility in a hushed reverence, as though they'd just witnessed something otherworldly. Elliot's heart raced. He didn't know what it was about Lila, but he knew one thing. He needed to make her his. The night settled over the city like a heavy cloak, dark and suffocating. Thick fog crept through the streets, winding around lampposts and spilling over the edges of sidewalks, giving everything a surreal, ghostly glow. In the distance, something stirred, a shape that wasn't bound by solid form, moving with a slow, deliberate grace through the dense mist. The shadows slithered along the walls of alleyways, crawling up buildings and drifting down darkened streets. It moved with an intent that was as cold and calculated as it was sinister, its shapeless form weaving through the fog like smoke. The creature approached the suburbs, where houses grew larger and gardens were neatly trimmed. each home seeming to boast its own silent pride. Finally, it came to rest outside an imposing residence, Elliot Crane's. Elliot slept soundly in his bed, a look of triumph still lingering on his face even in slumber, as if he dreamed of his recent conquests. The shadow hovered near the gate, casting an eerie, dark blot across the otherwise pristine lawn. Its form shifted, and the fog around it seemed to thicken, drawn to it like metal to a magnet. Slowly it moved forward, gliding across the lawn toward the grand house. Just as it reached the stone path, a voice echoed through the fog, firm, calm, and laced with a faint hint of amusement. "Stop!" The shadow froze, tendrils halting mid-air. A figure emerged from the darkness, poised and unyielding, her form illuminated by a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. Lila. The shadow seemed to ripple with surprise, and then, with a fluid grace, it began to take shape. The darkness condensed, forming into the silhouette of a tall, gaunt figure. His face, once hidden, now emerged, a decaying visage with sunken eyes and skin that seemed stretched over ancient bones. Eldritch, the vampire, his form crackling with the energy of something ancient and terrible. "Oh." Eldritch's voice was smooth and dry, like the sound of crumbling parchment. "He's one of yours?" Lila smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Yes, Eldritch, he's mine." Eldritch inclined his head, the barest flicker of intrigue in his hollow gaze. "Fair game, my dear," he murmured, his voice dripping with an old-world charm. "I'll leave you to your project." He cast one last glance toward the house, his decaying features twisting into a sardonic grin, before he vanished back into the fog, leaving only a faint whisper of darkness trailing in his wake. Lila remained, her gaze fixed on Elliot's home, her expression unreadable. The fog curled around her, thickening as though in reverence. She stood under the pale, haunting glow of the moon, her beauty a striking contrast to the darkened night. And yet something was wrong, something in the way her shadow shifted against the ground. Beneath the soft moonlight, her shadow seemed to move independently, shifting and distorting, revealing flashes of something far less human, far more monstrous. It stretched, writhing like a living thing, jagged edges and elongated fingers splayed out as if reaching for prey. For an instant, sharp horns and a wicked tail flickered into view, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curling in a faint smile as she watched the house, her own shadow hinting at the truth of her nature, a being born of darkness, deception, and the thrill of the hunt. The moonlight faded as clouds swallowed it once more, casting her in complete shadow. She turned, her figure dissolving into the night, leaving Elliot's house untouched, for now. Lila Valen's office tower rose above the city like a dark monolith, an architectural marvel that commanded attention as much as she herself did. Hundreds of employees worked tirelessly on the floors beneath her, each one held in awe of their enigmatic leader. No one could fully describe what the company did, only that it involved property acquisitions, high-stakes investments, and a reputation for efficiency and dominance in the market. Lila operated with a precision that was almost supernatural, and while her staff respected her authority, they were also entranced by her charisma. Those who worked hard and upheld her standards flourished, rising quickly through the ranks and receiving handsome rewards. But those who tried to cut corners, cheat the system, or undermine her rules found themselves removed swiftly and ruthlessly, their careers dismantled with the same ease as one might sweep dust from a countertop. At her desk, Lila sat poised and regal, reviewing the latest reports on a new acquisition. Her secretary, an earnest young man who blushed whenever he entered her presence, knocked lightly at her door. "Miss Valen," he said, a mix of nerves and adoration in his tone. "Elliot Crane is here to see you." He doesn't have an appointment." A flicker of interest flashed in her eyes. "Show him in," she said smoothly, already anticipating the encounter. Elliot entered with an air of confidence, his gaze sweeping the luxurious office, as though evaluating his own competition. But Lila didn't look up immediately. She continued scanning her document, radiating indifference. After a pause, she finally spoke, her voice cold and direct. "I'm very busy, Mr. Crane. Unless your visit here can add money to my account, I believe you're wasting my time." Elliot faltered for a split second, unused to such a blunt reception. He cleared his throat, slipping on his most charming smile as he walked closer. "Lila, I just thought I'd pay you a visit. See if we could get to know each other a bit better." She glanced at him, her gaze cutting through his facade like a blade. "Get to know each other?" she repeated, her tone dripping with amusement. "Is that what this is? I have no interest in charming words, Mr. Crane. Words don't hold value here." Elliot stammered, struggling to keep his composure. He was a master at disarming people, bending them to his will, but Lila made him feel small, insignificant. Every attempt he made to impress her, to paint himself as her equal, only seemed to amuse her further. She watched him with an expression that bordered on disdain, like a queen entertaining a court jester. After a few more failed attempts to win her over, he finally left her office, feeling deflated. For the first time in years, Elliot Crane felt unsure of himself, his usual confidence replaced with a gnawing sense of inadequacy. That afternoon, determined to regain his confidence, he sought out a new venture, a struggling sports training centre, known for its traditional martial arts classes. It was an old building, and he could tell just from the faded signage and dated equipment that it was barely making ends meet. Perfect. He entered as a new member, his goal clear: infiltrate, gain the owner's trust, and start enticing members away to Titan fitness. It was a tried and true tactic, one he'd used many times before, but this time, the owner, a grizzled man with a lifetime of martial arts training etched into his stance, wasn't interested. The man hardly looked at him, brushing off his attempts at conversation. He dismissed Elliot's praise with grunts and scowls, treating him like a nobody. Elliot seethed, but he kept his cool, forcing himself to smile through the rejection, vowing to find another way to bring the place down. As he left the centre, his mood darkened. He spotted a familiar figure entering through the front doors. Lila. She moved with a grace that drew every eye in the building, her expression sharp and intent. "Oh," she said with a faint smile, as if surprised. "If I'd known you were a martial artist, Elliot, I would have treated you differently." Elliot, desperate to impress, straightened his posture, trying to look more capable than he felt. "Well, I've dabbled in the arts for a long time," he said smoothly, hoping his bluff would go unnoticed. "Thought I'd give this place a look, but I'll admit, they're not very friendly." A smirk crossed Lila's face as she watched him. "Not friendly?" she repeated. "Interesting." She tilted her head, the flicker of a smile dancing on her lips. "This is my gym, Elliot. I own it." For a moment, Elliot felt the floor drop out from under him. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Lila simply gave him a polite nod, as though dismissing a trivial matter, and walked past him, leaving him standing there, stunned and, for the second time that day, feeling. Elliot stood in his office, eyes narrowed, waiting impatiently as the door creaked open. The man standing before him looked far from his usual confident self. He was a broken figure, his shoulders hunched and his gaze pleading. It was Jeff Adams, the owner of the small gym he'd been systematically dismantling over the past few months. "Please, Elliot," Jeff began, his voice strained. "We were supposed to be friends. I helped you when you first came to my gym. I thought you were here to help me, to help keep the place alive. This is everything to me. My father started this gym. It's all I have left of him." Elliot's eyes hardened. This was the part he hated. The begging, the desperation. It felt like weakness, and he had no time for it. "Jeff," he said coldly, crossing his arms, "that's business. I never promised you anything. You should have been more careful with your members. Offered them something they couldn't refuse. They came to me because you couldn't keep up." Jeff looked at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "I treated you like a friend, and all the while you were spreading rumours about me, convincing my members to leave. I never stood a chance." Elliot scoffed, giving him a dismissive look. "Life's hard, Jeff. Grow up. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. You're wasting my time." A silence hung in the air, thick and charged. Jeff's expression shifted, the sadness in his eyes darkening into something deeper, something ancient. He stood up straighter, his hands clenched into fists, and as he turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, words Elliot could barely make out. "May retribution find the hearts of the treacherous and make them suffer as I have suffered." The words hung in the air like a tangible presence, sending a shiver down Elliot's spine. He shook it off quickly, rolling his eyes. Old superstitions, he thought. Curses didn't bother him. He watched as Jeff walked out, shoulders slumped, leaving him alone in the silence of his office. Just as the door closed behind Jeff, it swung open again, almost immediately, and in walked Lila. She entered with a graceful confidence, her eyes bright with something that looked like mischief. "I just had a feeling we should get to know each other better, Elliot," she said, her tone dripping with charm. "You being a martial arts practitioner and all, I do love a fighter." Elliot's mood shifted instantly. It was as though the air had changed, filled with her intoxicating presence. She hadn't just brushed him off after all. He felt like he'd won her favour, finally earning her attention, her interest. This was validation, proof that he was back in control, the king of his world. "Well," he said, unable to keep the smug grin off his face, "I'm glad to hear it. There aren't many who can appreciate what it takes to do what we do, Lila." She watched him, an amused smile curling on her lips. "No, there aren't many. Only a few are willing to do what's necessary. To win." Her words held an edge, a darker meaning that Elliot didn't quite grasp. He leaned in, relishing the victory he felt surging through him. 2 wins in one day, he muttered to himself, feeling the high of success once more. Jeff was defeated, Lila was interested, and nothing could touch him. Lila's eyes lingered on him, almost too long, as if assessing him from the inside out. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she said, "Then I'll be watching closely, Elliot. Very closely." She turned, leaving the room with a grace that left him breathless. He watched her go, intoxicated by her presence, certain that he was on the verge of something monumental. But as the door clicked shut behind her, a faint chill crept over him, like the lingering shadow of something he couldn't quite see, something that left him wondering if he hadn't gained 2 wins, but rather stepped blindly into a game he didn't know the rules of. "Mr. Crane, you're not looking well," one of his staff commented hesitantly, catching him as he passed through the office. It had been weeks since Elliot had first started spending time with Lila, and though he brushed off any suggestion that he was struggling, his appearance told a different story. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his usually sharp features seemed somehow dulled, as though something was slowly draining the life out of him. "Nonsense," Elliot replied, forcing a confident smile. "I am living my best life. I've been busy, sure, meeting with Lila and working on new projects, but I've never felt more alive." His voice held a forced enthusiasm, and though he managed to laugh, there was an emptiness in it. He hurried off, brushing away any lingering concern with an air of indifference. That evening, he was seated across from Lila in an upscale restaurant, the kind of place where velvet drapes lined the walls and chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over everything. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She seemed even more radiant, her dark eyes glinting in the low light. "You're captivating, Lila," he said, reaching for her hand. "Your beauty, your power, everything about you is remarkable." She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "I've heard all this before, Elliot," she replied, her tone laced with boredom. Elliot felt a pang of frustration, but he masked it quickly, redoubling his charm. He was used to winning people over, to hearing admiration and respect in their voices, yet Lila remained an enigma, as cool and elusive as ever. After dinner, they stepped outside, and a sleek black car waited at the curb to take Lila home. Elliot slid in beside her, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, hoping to catch some sign of approval. As they pulled up to her grand estate, its shadowed walls looming under the night sky, Elliot leaned in. "I'd love to come in for a nightcap," he said, his voice smooth, eager. Lila turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready, Elliot?" she asked, her eyes glinting with something darker than mere invitation. "Oh, yes," he replied, a thrill rushing through him. She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Then by all means enter, by your own free will." He stepped out of the car, feeling an odd chill at her words but brushing it off, thinking only of the prize waiting inside. Inside her lavish home, he couldn't help but admire the elegance surrounding him. Dark, antique furniture filled the rooms, and tall windows let in slivers of moonlight, casting intricate shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was thick with mystery, and he felt the thrill of finally being in her private world. "Lila, I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're incredible. I don't think I've ever felt this way before." Lila merely watched him, an unreadable look on her face. "I've heard it all before, Elliot," she said again, her tone as indifferent as ever. Desperate to make an impression, he continued, "No, truly, I mean it. I think I might even love you." A glint of something sharp flashed in her eyes, and she leaned in, close enough that he could feel the coldness radiating from her. "I know you do, Elliot," she murmured. Her gaze held his, and for a moment he felt a strange, creeping unease, an inkling that perhaps he'd underestimated her, that he'd let himself fall into something far beyond his control. But her eyes held him, and he was too enchanted to care. For tonight, he was hers, even if the cost was something he couldn't yet fathom. Elliot's world had narrowed to a single obsession, Lila. He could hardly think straight anymore, consumed by thoughts of her every minute, craving her approval like a starving man craves food. He found himself waiting on her every word, desperate to prove himself worthy. That evening, he found himself standing before her, his voice trembling with need. "Lila, I want you to marry me," he blurted out, his heart pounding. "I want to be with you always. I'll do anything." Lila's response was a laugh, low and dark. Her eyes danced with amusement, and she regarded him with a look that was almost pitying. "Oh, Elliot," she purred, "I know men like you all too well. You think that once we're married, you'll take everything from me, slowly leeching away my wealth and power. No, no," he insisted, shaking his head with a fervour that bordered on desperation. "I would never do that, Lila. I'll do anything to prove my love. Anything." "Anything?" she asked, her voice silky smooth, a hint of darkness woven into it. He nodded, his gaze locked onto her, unwavering. In that moment, he would have moved heaven and earth to win her favour. Lila's lips curled into a cunning smile, and she reached into a drawer, producing a thick stack of papers. "Then let's make it official," she said, placing the contract on the table. "This document will transfer all of your businesses to me. I need to know, Elliot, that you're not just trying to take from me. I need you to give, to show me your devotion." Elliot barely registered the words. His mind was hazy, clouded by his overpowering need for her. His hands shook as he took the pen, his every thought centered on the promise that she'd finally be his. "Sign this, Elliot," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down his spine. "And I'll be yours for this night. But I must warn you, I am not like other women. I've been known to be quite dominating." The promise in her words stoked a fire within him, and without a second thought, he scrawled his signature across the contract. She lifted her phone and took pictures as he signed, even recording a video as he recited, "I am signing this contract willingly, transferring all my businesses to Lila Valen of my own free will." He glanced up as he finished, noticing for the first time 2 figures standing in the shadows, silent witnesses, her lawyers. They slipped out of the room as silently as they had appeared, and he didn't give them a second thought. His entire world had narrowed down to this moment, to her. With a final flourish of his signature, he looked up at her, triumphant. "I am yours for this night, Lila, by my own free will," he said, his voice full of longing. "You have asked for me, and I accept." Her smile grew, slow and wicked. "Yes, I have, and now you are mine." Before his eyes, her form began to shift, her features elongating, twisting into something dark and horrifyingly beautiful. Her eyes burned with a crimson fire, her skin taking on a darker hue, as though shadows themselves clung to her. Horns sprouted from her head, curling gracefully like a crown of thorns, and her mouth twisted into a smile that revealed sharp, gleaming fangs. Her entire form radiated an aura of ancient power, dripping with both evil and allure. Elliot's breath hitched as he watched, a horrified fascination locking him in place. Her laughter echoed through the room, rich and resonant, filled with a dark, malicious pleasure that sent shivers down his spine. "Didn't I tell you, Elliot?" she whispered, her voice now deeper, more resonant, echoing through his mind. "I am not like other women. I warned you I could be dominating, didn't I?" The room around him began to darken, shadows creeping in from every corner, swallowing the light. He tried to move, to flee, but his legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place as her laughter filled his ears, drowning out everything else. And as the night closed in around him, Elliot realized, far too late, that he had given himself willingly, utterly, irreversibly, to something far beyond his understanding, something that had waited centuries to claim a fool like him. The darkness swallowed him whole, and her laughter was the last sound he would ever hear. Jeff Adams swept the floor of his small, empty gym for what he believed would be the last time. The room was silent, the echoes of former members now a distant memory. His heart felt heavy as he prepared to lock the doors for good. His family's legacy lost to the machinations of a man he had once foolishly called a friend. As he straightened up, ready to leave, the faint sound of footsteps caught his attention. He looked up to see a figure approaching, a woman with a scarf wrapped around her head, obscuring her face. She moved quickly, slipping an envelope into his hand without a word. Before he could thank or question her, she had turned and disappeared into the shadows, Assuming it was another bill, another reminder of his failure, he sighed and tore it open, bracing himself for more bad news. But as he read, his eyes widened in disbelief. Titan Fitness, the very empire Elliot had built by destroying others, was now in his name. The letter, stamped and signed, declared him the sole owner of the entire chain, every location, every asset. His hand shook as he reread the words, certain he was imagining them. How could this be? Impossible, he whispered, looking up, searching the street for the mysterious woman who had handed him this gift. But she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her presence and the impossible fortune she had delivered. Over the next few days, word spread among other gym owners whom Elliot had scammed, each finding checks slipped under their doors, enough to keep their businesses running, and then some. The gym community buzzed with rumours and questions. It seemed Elliot had, without warning, sold everything to Lila Valen and vanished, leaving behind no trace or farewell. His empire, built on deceit, had been stripped from him overnight, passed into the hands of those he had wronged. Months passed, and Jeff, now the unexpected owner of a thriving business chain, walked home after another busy day, still unable to fully comprehend the reversal of his fortune. He felt gratitude, of course, but also an odd sense of wonderment, as though something cosmic and unseen had turned in his favour. As he passed a dimly lit alley, a voice rasped out of the shadows, brittle and broken. "Help a poor man. In need." Jeff paused, peering into the darkness. A figure huddled against the wall, a man whose skin clung to his face, like it had been stretched too tightly, his cheeks sunken and his eyes empty, haunted. But the face, even in its withered state, was one Jeff would never forget. "Elliot," he breathed, horror lacing his voice. The man's lips curled in a feeble, almost desperate attempt at a smile, his gaze hollow. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as if every word cost him the last remnants of his strength. Jeff took a step back, unable to reconcile the sight before him. The powerful, arrogant Elliot Crane reduced to this shrunken, withered shell. He felt a chill run through him, remembering the curse he had muttered in a moment of despair. Retribution had come for Elliot, but not by Jeff's hand. No, this was something far darker, something he dared not question. He looked away, unable to bear the sight any longer, and walked on, leaving the figure to sink further into the shadows. As he did, a shiver of understanding passed through him, a sense that whatever had brought Elliot to this fate was not yet satisfied, that some forces are best left unchallenged, especially when that they demand retribution. Behind him, the alley fell silent, save for the faint whisper of a name. Lila, echoing like a ghost, lost in the wind. Final chapter. A new conquest. Lila sat in the dimly lit drawing room of her grand estate, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across her face, a faint, satisfied smile lingering on her lips. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting as she savoured the victory over her latest conquest. Elliot Crane. Every last thread of his ambition had been unravelled, leaving him a hollow shell. This was her art, her skill, honed over centuries. Across from her, Eldritch lounged in an ancient, high-backed chair, watching her with eyes that glinted like embers. His decayed features were draped in shadow, but his expression held a faint note of admiration. The vampire leaned forward, his voice a crackle in whisper. "Well played, my dear," he said. "Though, if it were my game, I'd have drained him much quicker. Mortals are so delicate after all." Lila let out a soft, dark laugh. "That's where you and I differ, Eldritch. Why rush? Humans like Elliot, they ruin themselves quite nicely when given the chance. I merely let him cling to his ambitions until he was nothing more than a desperate fool, ready to sign everything away. I find satisfaction in letting them watch their worlds collapse." Eldritch raised a brow, his gaze sharpening. Ah, yes, the succubus's touch. There's always a certain elegance to your methods. Legends speak of my kind, Lila murmured, her voice laced with a sinister charm. The greedy, the selfish, the powerful, they all think themselves untouchable, above consequences. They think they're controlling the game, and they never see it coming until it's too late. She tilted her head, watching the flickering candlelight. In the end, they give me everything, willingly. Efficient, precise. Eldritch agreed, his voice like dry paper. Our methods may differ, but we share a common taste for justice, one that's far beyond what mortals deserve. A pity they never understand the beauty of it all. For a moment, silence fell between them, thick with the shared understanding of the creatures older than time. Finally, Eldritch rose from his seat, his movements slow, measured, as though savouring each step. It's been a pleasure, Lila, he said, inclining his head. While we may walk different paths, our desires often cross. I hope our work brings us together again. He paused at the door, reaching into his cloak, his lips twisted into a sly smile as he produced a small, folded newspaper clipping, handing it to her with a hint of amusement. A gift, my dear, he said, a glint of dark mischief in his eyes. I was going to pursue this one myself, but I thought you'd enjoy it far more. With a final nod, he slipped into the shadows, his form dissolving into tendrils of darkness, vanishing into the night. Lila unfolded the clipping, her eyes narrowing as she took in the headline. It was an article, brief but telling, about a powerful financier in the city, a man known for his callous disregard for those he destroyed in his relentless pursuit of wealth and influence. His name was unfamiliar, but the face, the description, the details, all too familiar. Her smile grew as she read, her mind already weaving a plan, already savouring the next game to be played. The newspaper clipping felt warm between her fingers, as though it held the promise of something deliciously inevitable. In the dim light, her laughter filled the empty room, soft and haunting, as she gazed at the photo of her next conquest. Thank you for watching. Remember, all the stories you hear on this channel are completely original. Your support, from likes, comments and super thanks to becoming a full member, is what keeps this channel alive and thriving. I couldn't do it without you, and I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you. Stay tuned for more chilling tales, and as always, thank you for being part of the Professor Shadow family.